In this video, only applies if you have a TI 83 or 84 type calculator. And in it, I'm going to show you how to use your calculator to make finding compound interest problems even easier than using the compound interest formula. You may always use this technique on your calculator in any of my classes. If you take another math class, you should always ask your instructor if it's okay to use this technique or not, or if they want you to use the formula. And so on the TI 83 and 84, there's an application that is built in called TVM Solver. TVM stands for time value of money problems, and it helps us solve these types of problems. Honestly, for compound interest, using the formula is pretty quick, and it's something that I think is probably perfectly fine to do. For the things we're going to do in the second part of this chapter, when we're talking about mortgages, when we're talking about retirement accounts, when we're talking about annuities, it's going to become a lot more useful to you to use TVM Solver because the formulas get much more intricate. But for compound interest, it's helpful, but certainly not required. So to get to TVM Solver, push the apps key on your calculator. The apps key is the third row of keys down. It is right next to the math key. And I know that if you have only had a TI 84 for a little bit, if you just bought it for this course or for a previous math course, even you haven't used it a lot, all the functions, it takes a while to learn where these keys are. I'm going to go somewhat quickly on these videos because otherwise they're going to turn into 2 hours long. That's one reason why I record them. You can pause the video at whenever you need to if you're looking about where that key is on your calculator. I completely understand it takes time if it's not something you use a lot. It's the same thing for me. Some of the keys on this calculator I don't use a lot because I don't teach courses that require them. So I don't mess around with the calculus functions a lot because I don't teach any courses that are calculus based. Things like that. I don't worry about the trig functions a lot because I don't teach any courses that you need trig for at the moment anyway. So to get to the applications, we hit the apps key, and the apps key is this key that is in the third row of the calculator. It is right next to math. And then you should see a menu that looks like this. For what we're going to do, you just choose the first one. Depending on your calculator, you might have other programs also preloaded onto it. But in general, the first several of these are actually all of these are by default on the TI 84 pluses, I think, at least the newer models of them. But finance isn't all of them, and it's also on TI 83s. So I'm going to hit enter. And then here, you see I have a nice long list of things. Later on, we're going to use one other function in this list. But for right now, we're only going to use the first one, the one that says TVM Solver. So which is selected by default, so I'm going to hit enter. And then I see this screen. This screen looks complicated the first few times you use it. I'm going to go over it using our example problems we did in the previous lesson. So, and that way we'll also make sure we did the work right in that previous lesson, so I don't have to edit those videos if I made a boo-boo somehow. So what I'm going to do right now is it's not going to let me clear. I'm going to try to put zeros in for all these values so we don't get distracted by them. Except when I can't, then I'll put a 1. Okay, so when you first load it, if you haven't used TVM Solver before, you might see a screen that looks like this with lots of zeros in it, maybe some other values. All of these values correspond to variables in our formula. Capital N here is the same as lowercase n in this default formula that we've been using from your textbook. So it's the total number of compounding periods over the length of the investment. So it's the number per year times the number of years. So here we found that that number is 4. So n equals 4. The interest rate. For TVM Solver, you put interest rates in as percents, not as decimals. So 4% interest, you would type in a 4. PV is present value. That is our principal. So here I deposited $500. PMT stands for payment. This is what we'll use when we figure out mortgage payments or payments for retirement accounts. We aren't going to use it for this because we aren't making regular payments into our savings account. FV is future value. That's what we want to find out. So we're going to come back to that. P/Y and C/Y is how many times a year the interest is compounded. One is how many times it's paid, and one is how many times it's compounded, something like that, or how many periods there are. Yeah, I think payments and compounding. For everything we do in this course, those numbers will always be equal to each other. And in fact, it is for most things in financial math. Your calculator defaults to making them equal. Here, it's one time a year, right? We saw here that M is 1. And so that's what I'm going to enter here is 1. So let's review what I've done. My N is N from my formula. It's the number of times interest is compounded a year times the number of years that the investment is being made for. So here we have once a year times 4 years. 1 times 4 is 4. I% is our interest rate expressed as a percentage. So in the formula, we would put 0.04 for 4%. Here, because it says, we notice we see that percent symbol there, that means we're entering it as a percentage. So we're just entering 4 for 4%. PV is the same as P. That stands for my present value. And so that's what I've deposited. That's my principal. And then it's once a year, so these last two ones, P/Y and C/Y, are both 1. The last line where you highlight either end or begin, it depends. That tells you, is the interest compounded at the end of each period or at the beginning of each period? Sometimes that will matter. If you don't know, if the problem doesn't say, assume that it's at the end of the period. That's the default. So normally if you were depositing money, right? If I deposit $100 into the bank's going to pay interest at the end of the year, not the start of the year, typically. So now to solve it, here's the tricky part. I go back up to FV. I go to whatever line I want to solve. Hit the alpha key on your calculator. It's the key right under the second key in the top left, near the top left corner. Hit alpha, and then once you've pushed it, don't push anything else and only push it once. Then push enter. And you see on the screen that over enter in green is the word solve. That's what we're doing here. We're solving this for future value. So alpha enter solves this. And we see that our future value is $584.93, which is the same thing we got before. One thing I should clarify is negative signs. The TVM solver follows some of the rules for accounting. And what that basically means is that you're going to have some values be negative depending whether you're paying in or taking out. Technically speaking, since we deposited $500 at the beginning, we should have made that negative because it's money coming out of our pocket, and then our final value would have been positive. For our purposes, I just need for you to understand that the sign for present value and future value is always going to be different. If present value is positive, future value is going to be negative. We'll talk about that more in depth when it becomes more important in a few lessons. But for right now, just ignore the signs. If you're just finding compound interest, ignore the signs, I think is a good strategy. So this checks out. We got the same answer we did when we did it by hand using the formula. So let's look at our next example. That was, I deposited $500 and it's compounded quarterly. So quarterly means that my N here is going to be 4 times 4. We saw that in our original problem that we did. So 4 times 4 is 16. It's still 4% interest. I have the same present value, but it's quarterly. So P/Y and C/Y will both be 4. And notice if you change P/Y, the calculator will automatically change C/Y to be the same value because they will almost always be the same value. It's rare that they aren't. Then I just go up to future value. It doesn't matter if there's already a value there. Like we still have the answer from the last question in there. That's fine. If that's going to confuse you, you could just type it over with a 0, but you don't have to. Just go to that line and then alpha and enter. And I get $586.29, which again matches what we did before. And now let's look at our final example problem that we had done previously. So in this one, I deposited $2,050 and my interest is 3.62%. So let's do this right now. And we figured out was 12 times 6. And again, I could put that in here like this. I could say 12 times 6. And it will tell me immediately that's 72. I mean, when I hit enter. My interest rate is 3.62%. So 3.62, enter. And for any of these, I could use the arrow keys instead of enter as I'm moving through here also. Present value is what I deposited, so that's $2,050. And then this is compounded monthly we have from our problem. So my P/Y and C/Y are both going to be 12. And then again, I'm solving for A, and A is future value. A is the same as FV. So alpha, solve, and I get $2,546.48. I encourage you to play around with TVM Solver even if you're using the formula for your homework assignments, because again, as we move forward, it's going to be a lot easier if you use TVM Solver than if you use formulas for some of what we do later on in the course. So again, I'm going to strongly encourage you to do that for here as well. But I'm here rather, I strongly encourage you to use it later on. For here, for right now, I'm really just encouraging you to use it so you get more familiar with it, more comfortable with it. Because the more you practice with it, the quicker it goes. The first time I used TVM Solver was frankly my first time teaching finite math. When I had taken classes before that involved interest, we had to do everything by hand or with just a scientific calculator. So it took me a little while to get used to TVM Solver because I'd never used it before. Just as I'm going to assume it will take you a while to get used to it because you haven't used it before either, many of you, most likely. But it's a very handy tool. It's going to make things a lot quicker for you, a lot simpler for you. I really hope you'll use it, and I really think you'll find that it's useful if you do use it. So if you have any questions about it, let me know. We will continue doing examples with it as we go through. Again, we'll also look at the formula because for ICCOC, a TI-84 is not specifically required for this class. You can use the formulas instead. Again, if it were me, I would put the investment in the TI-84 personally, even if math weren't my thing, just because it makes things a lot simpler. But I completely understand if you can't do that. And that's why the formulas are taught. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, have a great day and good luck as you move forward with your homework and other things.